Welcome back to ThinkTech. It's the 12 o'clock block here on Monday, and that means midnight in Brussels with Gauri Khandekar of Global Relations Forum. She joins us from Brussels. We always like to see her. Hi, Gauri.
Hi, Jay. Thank you again for having me. It's such
Always,
a pleasure.
always.
Always.
So let's talk about what's going on in Brussels and in Europe. I think these are, heavy times, and I tentatively entitled the show, "The Streets Are Alive in Europe."
Yes. Very well titled. You always have the perfect names, I must say so. And it is actually a sad reality or the new normal that's coming about here, which is increased police presence, security presence, police, army, the gendarmerie, as they say in France. And that's since the Charlie Hebdo attacks earlier this year in January. Especially in Brussels, you could see the military station basically outside every international institution, and there are many of it here. The European Union institutions, then various embassies, they're all based here. So you could see that, and it's a bit sad because it's changing. Times are changing for Europe, and it's no longer the carefree kind of free streets and freedom and security that you find. So for me, it's a big change over the last 10 years at least.
Yeah, after the events in Paris, those 6 venues of violence, they deployed 110,000 police and army around the country. That's a huge number of people in security, huge. And I imagine in a relative way the same thing happened in Brussels because of the connection with the terrorists in Brussels. So you must see them everywhere. And let me add that Barack Obama went to Paris. He didn't stay at a hotel for the COP21 Climate Change Conference. They put him at the American Embassy behind a heavy guard.
Yes.
And that just shows you the level of lack of security right now.
Yes. No, I agree. I mean, what happened in Brussels was, I think, even way beyond Paris. So, in the aftermath of the Paris attacks, most Parisians continued with their way of life. They came out and they were much more, how do you say it, getting on with the joie de vivre. Basically, they were the next day. People were out in pubs and bistros. But here, what happened in Paris, in Brussels, sorry, since a week ago, there was a lockdown. I don't know if you've heard it in the States, but Brussels was in lockdown. It was international news that the city basically came to a standstill. It was level 4, the maximum level of threat that the government declared, the prime minister declared. And during this 1 week, basically metros were closed, public transport was closed, most crowded streets were closed, and you had really more than increased presence of the military all around. They basically cordoned off certain areas in Brussels. Schools were closed as well, and they just reopened this last Wednesday. So this entire week, and this was because they said that there was an imminent and serious threat in Brussels that a repeat of the Paris attacks would happen, and the police apparently had concrete evidence of this. So they locked down the whole city. And as we spoke in the last show, the Paris terrorists, half of them were basically Belgians. They were based from Brussels,
Yeah.
and the terrorist attacks were planned in Brussels, actually.
Yeah.
And executed in Paris. And so this was a real threat, I mean, the threat in Brussels is quite grave. And so everywhere we went out, you could basically see the cops. And there was, the last Saturday, there was a huge police operation that took place last Saturday and Sunday. So there were 9 more than 21 house raids conducted. 16 people were arrested, but then only 2 were detained on terrorism charges. There were even gunshots fired in the city. So this was pretty serious, and most people did not step out. The police in the center of Brussels, so basically is in the space called the Grand Place, they were telling, and that's quite a popular place with the tourists, I must say. So the police basically told all the restaurants and the pubs to close their doors. And they told all the people living around the Grand Place or the main square to shut their windows because they might be firing. So it was that serious. Um, and this level of threat was not reduced at all until just the Monday.
Yeah.
And schools and metros conversely reopened last Wednesday, but it was quite serious.
How about you? How personally, Gauri, I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel threatened? Do you feel afraid? Have you gone out in your normal way since since the threat level was reduced? How has your life changed?
Extremely. I was very scared, because it's basically emergency situation. Yes, it's a state emergency. I was afraid to go out. I was even afraid to stand on the balcony because you never know when a stray bullet comes, if it could. You never know where the terrorists are. So the Saturday night, so the emergency was declared Friday night, I mean late Friday night, and then Saturday you got to know of things, and Saturday evening things took a turn for the worse. So we didn't know what was happening, and I must say I tweeted quite a bit. So I was looking for information on Twitter, what was happening exactly.
The
Yeah,
power of
because
social media.
exactly. But there is a lot of power in social media. I will just tell you what happened. So everybody was looking for information on Twitter, and there were people posting what's happening in their areas, uh, pictures of the police on the street. And then the police tweeted that, look, do not give out information of our positions because it might go into the wrong hands. And I started tweeting that too. I forwarded their tweet, and basically everybody was telling everybody, don't post, pictures of where the cops are. And then I think a Dutch a journalist, he's posted a picture of cat instead, Belgium cats. And basically everyone in Brussels started posting pictures of cats to kind of throw the terrorists or whoever might be, looking for information on the wrong track. And the internet was flooded with pictures of cats, which was quite odd. And I was watching this too, and I the first time that I actually saw some ISIS tweeters, and
Oh,
that really gave me the chills. They were
what
saying
did it say?
most of them were saying we're coming to Brussels, we're there now, and there'll be bloodshed. And oh, it's quite frightening for me, because you're seeing the person, online in a way, and that they're around somewhere here, or maybe I don't know, from Syria. But the fact that they're talking about a city, it makes a big difference. And I've never had that before. I've never experienced that before. And I almost left for India for 2 months, until everything calmed down. Because conversely, India seems like a much safer place at the
Really?
moment. Yeah, and then so I didn't basically leave the house, and I had stocked everything in my kitchen, and but I had to walk my dog. And even then, all my friends were like, "Oh, don't go," and just come quickly. And the next day on Monday, so threat level remained the same. On Sunday there was a review, and they decided that the threat level would remain the same. So on Monday, it was the same sense of insecurity. And I had a meeting at the European Commission, which is, is the most political zone in a way. And I still went to the meeting, quickly ran back, and then I went to the supermarket. And when I went to the supermarket, so I did my shopping and I was busy packing it into my car, and I saw a police car come through, and it was so frightening. So basically, they were just surveying it, because as you remember, Paris, there was a supermarket. There was an attack in the supermarket. So when I saw the car, I got so frightened, and I just dumped everything and I sped off basically. But it was quite real.
Oh, we live in very scary times. You know, the Pope is now in the Central African Republic, and he's surrounded with security, and there are concerns for his safety. There are still stabbings going on in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And, everything seems to be at the behest of the terrorists. They occupy the front page and all the news channels on a daily basis. And that's interesting, because ordinarily the news moves on, the fickle finger of fate writes and moves on, and the news cycle doesn't last that long. But in this case, it continues to last. ISIS continues to generate more trouble about it, and these threats in social media would give me likewise great concern. And as a result, we have reaction. We have reaction in terms of police presence on the street. I'm sure that they're searching for everybody they haven't found yet. And they are bombing in the Middle East, in Syria. France is bombing, and now I heard today that the UK has decided to bomb, to step up its bombing in Syria. So what you have is, an enormous threat, and therefore an enormous reaction. And before we started the show, you mentioned that this issue had fascinated you as to whether the reaction was appropriate to the threat and the violence. And so
Yeah.
you're writing something about it, Gauri?
Yes, I don't want to preempt my own piece, because I'm proposing a measure of security on how you can prevent these kind of attacks. Because as you know, remember the Paris attacks were exactly the same as the Mumbai attacks, and they're quite easy to plan. They're quite cheap, and you don't need much training in a way, and the impact is major. The impact is really something quite big. But how do you prevent this? Because in the Mumbai attacks, the Bombay police were criticized for not being well equipped. But the same attacks happen in Paris, and the French police are very well equipped. Um, but the scale of casualties was the same. So how do you prevent this? So my paper will be speaking about a measure of security, which might be a bit controversial, but I think is the safest bet, on preventing these attacks quickly, the scale of attacks, and saving innocent lives. But anyways, I really think, Jay, that the response to these kind of threats should be domestic, because most of the terrorist attacks that took place in Europe have been perpetrated by homegrown terrorists, So the threat is internal. You cannot deal with it externally, because Syria erupted after Afghanistan was, let's say, not destroyed, but dismantled in a way, in a bit, Before that, it was the Pakistani mountains. And then after Syria, then who knows? There might be, Somalia, Mogadishu, whatever, there are different places. So the location, geographic location is not important. It's an ideological warfare. But what Europe can do is have better security at home. The debate here in Europe was to re-erect the borders inside the Schengen area, which means that Schengen means that there's no borders between a group of countries in the European Union. And so they want to re-erect borders, but that's not the way to go, I think. There should be much more intelligence sharing, especially between, two countries like France and Belgium, which are neighbors. There needs to be a European Intelligence Bureau. That could be a possibility. And there needs to be more security at home. So I think these are the immediate measures that need to be taken, and then bombing could or could not impact. You never know how much impact you have, and it's more targeting security at home to preserve security of European people, I think.
Well, that's happening, isn't it, in terms of exchanging information between the countries involved, lots of meetings with the leaders and assurances of collaboration in dealing with the terrorists. I mean, I don't know exactly what drives ISIS. I don't think anybody really knows. But they have certainly woken, the sleeping lion. They've woken all these countries up who are now focused and willing to commit resources, money, take some chances, change the quality of life for you and people around Europe, maybe cut down on civil liberties a little bit. That's what happens with terrorism, and they certainly have woken those kind of reactive, steps. And I guess I can hardly wait to hear you reveal your thoughts in that article.
Definitely on the next show, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. For now, we're going to take a short break, though, Gary.
Yes.
And then we'll come back and we'll talk some more about the reaction in the various countries and the Middle East and try to figure out where that goes. Okay, that's Gauri Khandekar, Global Relations Forum, talking about the streets. The streets are alive in Europe. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
We're back. We're live with Gauri Khandekar of Global Relations Forum. She's really in the middle of it by being in Brussels. This is midnight in Brussels, although it's actually closer to 11 than midnight. And we're talking about the streets are alive in Europe. Well, it strikes me that Europe has got to do these things, for its own protection, but also to satisfy the political demands of its populations. It's got to take another look at borders. It's got to take another look at security. And it's got to compare notes. I mean, one solution has got to be to collaborate in terms of intelligence. If every country just operates without collaboration, then every country becomes a potential victim. On the other hand, query whether it's useful if this is stepping on your article, then just tell me I'll have to wait for the answer. It's useful for France and the UK to go on bombing raids in the Middle East. And I'm really wondering if that helps to cut off what's happening.
I doubt it, going on the bombing raids would not help really. Because I don't know if we spoke a couple of times about how counterterrorism is structured inside the EU. But so basically there was my big passion when my master thesis was based on it. And it was at the time of the Mumbai attacks that I did a whole study of the EU's counter-terror architecture. And I was going to do a PhD on that as well, and including cyber terrorism, online radicalization, which I now think I should have done. But anyways. So basically, Europe has a lot of different structures. The European Union, yes? Mm-hmm. It's quite elaborate, but not that intense. Yeah. So there's a Europol, which means the European Police, not academy, but an organization, yes? Uh-huh. Where the heads of police meet basically. There is Eurojust, which is again a similar forum for meeting of lawmakers. So rule of law, policing. There is meetings which take place at the European Council of the counter-terrorism heads of all states, member states. So all 28 EU member states meet. And I think we also spoke last time of how different countries are heading various projects, yes, like Check the Web of online radicalization or radicalization in prisons. And the EU also has a counter-terror SAR, so a chief counterterrorism coordinator. But even in despite of this, member states do not share intelligence, and that is the crux of security here. It's intelligence sharing. Until now, EU member states were not even sharing amongst themselves the data of people traveling abroad and back, which is crucial, because then another member state knows who went to Syria and who didn't. So this information was not shared. Information is mainly shared bilaterally, but not amongst 2-3 member states. So if attacks are planned in 2-3 different member states, you won't know. Like France would not know, let me speak a bit also about Molenbeek, which was the hot spot. I think we did discuss last time of how it's called the jihad capital of Europe. And it's true, it's not a ghetto. It's quite a well-developed space, but you have a lot of Muslim people who live there, and of course some of the elements are also these Islamist terrorists, right? And Molenbeek has been in news for the last various attacks, the Madrid bombings, the London bombings, and it was implied. And we got to know of the news that the mayor of Molenbeek, this locality of Brussels, was given a list of 80 terrorists who live in Molenbeek, and she did nothing with them. Basically, one of the journalists of The Guardian, I think, pointed out that you could actually see the house of the Paris terrorist attacks perpetrators from her office window, so she could basically see them.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. So this much information is available,
Yeah.
But how is it shared? And that's what Paris has really exposed, is that this information is not shared when it's needed.
Yeah. Well, Europe is going to have to work on that and get it together.
Yeah.
I get the sense that although people criticize the FBI and other intelligence agencies in this country for various things, and we have the Patriot Act with the controversy around that and snooping on people. Europe doesn't have that, and Europe is a better victim. It's a victim to this sort of thing because it is not as aggressive, I think, as the U.S. For example, do they wiretap in Europe? Do they wiretap your telephone? Do they wiretap your mobile phone? Do they snoop on you? Is that happening or not?
I honestly don't know, but the Sun, Rupert Murdoch's empire, basically they were tapping different people. The government wasn't, but the Sun newspaper, Rupert Murdoch has these he's the news czar basically of the UK, and I think he owns quite a bit of influential outlets. And they were tapping telephones, and it was a huge controversy, They even tapped the victims' families and the victims of the London bombings.
It wasn't the police, it was Murdoch.
Yeah, it was Murdoch. And you never hear the police tapping it. So I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Europe is quite keen on security.
Yeah.
Freedom of information.
Well, don't you think this is all kind of the modern Europe, the post-Second World War Europe, where You know, nobody wants to look like a police state. Nobody, I don't know, Russia excluded, right? Russia has a different approach. But
It's
nobody
ancient,
in Western Europe
really.
wants to look like a police state. And so they've had open borders, and they don't have a lot of intelligence. Although I remember, maybe this is part of the solution. I remember the cameras in the UK, in London. It has a sort of the all-time record for street corner video cameras. Is that
Yeah.
all over Europe, or is that just London?
Oh no, it's all over Europe. The CCTV networks. And one of my ideas in the paper, which we'll speak about next time, links to that as well. You know how they could be implicated in a mechanism. Basically, because this is all wired. I mean, not wired like hearing wise, but at least there are eyes on the street. Everything is taped. You have surveillance cameras everywhere, and that's a good thing. But I was just saying that there's so much of there are countries that are so adamant about freedoms that they won't even take off child pornography off the web, and that is serious. I mean, forget radicalization. There's child pornography on the webs,
Yeah.
especially in Sweden. And what do you do about it?
Yeah.
So it's an issue here. Liberty means quite a bit. Yeah, and conversely, this is what at stake now.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Well, Europe may have to change the way it engages with the police. May have to change security and police action and engagement. Too bad,
Lifestyle.
because the liberty side is a much better way to go.
Yeah.
Well, so I get a disconnect, though, actually. Tell you what, here we have all of this trouble about terrorism, which is still trouble and still
Yes.
occupies everybody's mind. And the fickle finger of the news media is still on that issue, when all of a sudden we turn on our television sets and we see riot police in Paris. We see, and you say, what is this? Is this more terrorism? Why all these people in Paris with tear gas and what have you? No, it's not terrorism. It's climate change. They're out again. Every week there's something special going on in Paris. So do you get a disconnect over that? I don't understand why we can have a different protest every single week and they're not necessarily related.
Oh my God, France is the country of protesters. You have strikes almost every day somewhere in France. Well, that's for sure. But now, yes, you have the UN climate conference that's taking place in Paris, and you have leaders of 150 countries meeting up to see if they can get an agreement on how they could tackle climate change, which is a good thing for Paris because, it's making people again come out and, be angry about something else other than terrorism and at least come out, and it's changing the topic, changing the mood. So, yeah, I mean, it's a welcome change perhaps. I doubt, honestly, that something will come out really from the COP21, except for another summit. But let's hope for the best, actually.
Well, there were optimistic sounds. I just, on the way in for this show, I was listening to National Public Radio, and there were those people saying that they're optimistic about the results. They think there will be resolutions that will be effective, in advancing the world effort on climate change. But as you say, it's very hard to have unanimity and then to have a meaningful execution of a resolution that will have an effect scientifically on climate change. A lot of people are excited about this. There are people here in Hawaii who are engaged in social media campaigns. I don't know if you ever heard of the TED Talks program. Well, there's a TEDx program here, which is the junior model of that. And they're all engaged in a campaign, sending social media around the world, encouraging the leaders who are at the Paris COP conference, to take meaningful steps. And I suspect that, the protests we saw in the streets of Paris a day or two ago are a reflection of a lot of communications from a lot of organizations all over the world trying to reach these leaders and challenge them to do something. And your comment is probably exactly right on. Namely, this will lead to nothing but another conference, because not the way humanity works these days. It's hard to come together on such a thing.
Well, actually found a brilliant cartoon which I tweeted, and that was my caption basically. If do I think if something might come about from the COP21? And I said yes, another summit. And the cartoon was basically all leaders, and there's a huge Noah's Ark. With all the animals sitting ready two by two, and the leaders sitting on a platform saying, we finally have a binding agreement, and they're all sitting on top of a board which says UN Climate Conference 2040 Mount Everest. They're basically sitting on top of the Mount Everest. There's water everywhere and Noah's Ark ready, and they say, okay, finally we have it, when it's too late, basically. But so what you have in Paris now is a lot of statements, I would say. I wouldn't go to the extent of saying hypocritical statement, but a lot of statements. A lot of global leaders saying big things, saying very emotional things. Everybody must have said, oh yes, we have to save humanity, and it's the next generation, and we owe it to our grandchildren. But what's going to happen is that negotiators are now going to sit down. So all the leaders will leave, and then it depends on how much these tough negotiators are going to give and take, And then really what comes about is nothing, not even a reflection of what the leaders have said. So this is the reality of it. It's really business, it's you get a false sense of security and hope. But then what it boils down to is very different positions. There are some countries which really are suffering, especially in the Pacific Islands, Bangladesh, Maldives.
Yeah.
There's so many countries that are poor and that they're suffering.
Yeah.
And then you have also Poland, for instance, in the European Union. So the European Union is posting for the most advanced level of commitment. But Poland really wants to have a robust industry because it's also developing. And then you have India and China, which are, and they're supported by all the other developing countries, which say we have a right to develop now, So this is what it comes to, and the US as well does not want to hamper its growth because jobs are important. What people don't realize nowadays is that jobs from the clean energy sector are creating much more, the clean energy sector is creating much more jobs than coal. So it's all in technology. It's a whole technological transformation which could put a spin on things.
Yeah, because ordinarily you start with the tension between development and business against the idealism and save the world mentality, and it's money versus no money. But if you put technology in there and you say, well, it costs plenty of money to develop the technologies that will save the world, provide clean energy and all that, then there are interests already, capital concentrations, if you will, that favor action on climate change. So maybe, as you say, the recipe, the playing field is changing now, and maybe that is having an effect on COP21.
Of course, a little bit, I would say. Most people don't know this, but China is really heavily invested into solar energy and is producing more than the US and Europe combined in the last year. So, and so is India, it's heavily reliant on now, or largely developed. It's one of the leaders of wind power. But the ratio of coal still dominates. The ratio of fossil fuels still dominates. And it's this change, in this, how easily available technologies will be made. The US just pledged $50 million to the poor nations most affected by climate change currently. But $50 million is nothing, you know. It's really how easily the West is going to make these technologies available
Yeah.
for these developing countries.
Well, you know, there's an intersection of all of this, Gauri. I'll tell you why I say that.
Yeah,
ISIS, okay, is all over Iraq and Syria.
yes,
And I got a think tank letter, and I want to ask you about the role that think tanks play in all this over the weekend. And it had a map. It had two maps overlaid. The first map was a map of the water sources in that area. In other words, where people in Iraq, Syria customarily found water.
yes,
And that was interesting. There weren't that many of them, but they were scattered and shown on the map. And the second map was a map of the towns that ISIS controlled in the area. And
yes,
the funny thing about it is, and you could make all kinds of conclusions from this, is that the towns they controlled were the same towns of the water sources. So
Yeah.
water has a big play in the ISIS strategy in that area, as well as oil. Don't get me wrong; they like the money they get from oil, but they're very akamai about water, and they know that going forward we're going to have a global issue about water, and so they're controlling the water. And when there's less water, they will have greater power because they control the water. So, you know, it's not only the good guys that want to address climate change, it's the bad guys want to address climate change and use it as a weapon, water as a weapon. How do you like that?
yeah. It's sad. No, it's a sad world we're living in, actually. But it's very true. There have been so many think tanks, even in Europe, but also in Asia, around the world, actually, who have been saying that water is a huge source of violence worldwide. Also, terrorism. Sorry, I must correct myself. I'm hearing the terrorism aspect for the first time in terms of water resources. Social welfare, yes, but not water.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the best and most effective ways to destroy ISIS, or at least to contain them, is to cut off their supplies, you know. But, and that's why I think this is all politics, because nobody's doing that. It's the most practical solution to really containing their flow and their expansion, and, you know, is to cut the water flows. You know, people are traveling there, cut the flights, you know. Why isn't this being done?
Oh.
And so I agree with you, how the way climate links to insecurity is a big issue. Of course, it's also, you can see indirectly about the genocide in Sudan. Yes, it was also because of oil and fossil fuels, which of course led to the splitting of the two countries. But it's, you know, growing demand in India and China, and how that was impacting. And if you have clean energies, you wouldn't have such genocides. So you're completely right.
Well, here's my thought about it. Trying to you know, see all this in the context of our conversations, this conversation and other conversations, is that the world now strategically is very complex. It's complex on technology. It's complex on terrorism and on diplomacy, and you happen to be there. You happen to be there as a think tank person. And it strikes me that politicians don't go to school necessarily to be able to manage all these competing issues. They learn so that they can get into power. They learn so they can, you know, get votes. Nobody says you have to go to Leadership 101.
Yeah.
But you know who can help them? It's the think tanks like you. You can make analysis of these complex, you know, and you know, very complex issues and the competition of all these considerations, and you can sort it out for them. And I suspect, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I suspect going forward in the next 5 years, 10 years, when these guys have to figure out, you know, when the world gets to be more global, they have to figure out the global implications of everything they do. They have to, you know, defend off from global attacks, economically or physically. They're going to be calling you. They're going to be asking for your advice. They're going to be reading your reports and your articles because you have the ability and the desire to figure out these complexities, and it becomes more valuable.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's, let me just give an example, yes? So, just recently, hello? Jay, are you there?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just plugging in my computer. So, I proposed the creation of an EU-India forum on that's going to happen actually next year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the ways.
Can't hear you very well. And I suspect we're going to have to defer this conversation to our next talk, Gauri. But that's Gauri Khandekar, and she is a think tank person with Global Relations Forum, which is her think tank. And we talk to her every 2 weeks on midnight in Brussels. Brussels has been the scene of some violence lately and connection with the Paris attacks. And the title of our show today was The Streets Are Alive in Europe. We'll check back with her again in 2 weeks and find out what else is going on. Thank you so much, Gauri. We'll talk soon. Aloha.